Hello, Paul.
Hello.
Thank you for joining the show and accepting my invitation.
My pleasure entirely. Thank you.
So, hello everyone. Again, this is 11th episode of Audio Products Podcast, and this is the last episode of the first season. But it's obviously we can use the expression "last but not least" because we have a very special guest, Paul McCabe, who is a Senior VP of Research and Insight in Roland Future Design Lab. And Paul will actually exactly explain in a second what it is and what Roland Future Design, by the name you can already guess, but we will actually go deeper into the subject, right? What the lab does and what Paul's role and in the company is. And generally in the, we'll just talk about the future challenges of the music industry and generally musicians, creatives, right? And so Paul, once again, thank you very much, for accepting the invitation. Maybe if I can just start, by asking you to, introduce yourself and tell a little bit, why how you got to where you are right now, right, in Roland.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I've been working in the music products world, I suppose you can say, for about 40 years now. After high school, I went to study music in college, and back when I had more hair than I do now, my dream was to be a rock star and a composer and a synthesist and a sound designer. And I was very fortunate in my last 2 years of high school growing up in Vancouver. I was very active in band. Trumpet was my first instrument, and I was fortunate that I was able to move up to the senior levels of all of the bands and orchestras as soon as I started high school, and that was a privilege and a challenge in and of itself. But yeah, about 2 years left in high school, I discovered a storage room where typically we would just move chairs for the orchestra in and store them when the choirs were there, and brought them back out again when the bands and orchestras were practicing, rehearsing. But in the back of this storage room, there was a shelf, and on that shelf there were various things covered in fabric and in drop cloths. And one day I lifted up the drop cloths and discovered a complete Roland System 100 semi-modular synthesizer, and another drop cloth. There was a TIAC 3440 open reel 4 tracks on quarter-inch recorder, some microphones and what have you, and that was it. I was just hooked. I was already starting to, my musical instrument interests were starting to move away from or expand beyond classical, which I still love, and get into progressive rock and electronic as well. And so discovering the synthesizer was just a real gift. And I spent many hours in that storage room learning the synthesizer for the last 2 years of my high school, and then went on to study music in college. Was the only synthesizer player in the program, which was actually fun because it kept me very busy. If anybody ever wanted synthesizer in any of the music they were working on, they only had one person they could come to, and so that school had an ARP 2600, so I got to learn more about another form of modular synthesizer in the ARP 2600, and then connecting it with some of the first drum machines and what have you. And so my passion for electronic music and electronic musical instruments continued to grow through that time. And afterwards I was playing in bands, and I guess the career really started when I would 3 nights a week I would be waiting in a local music store in downtown Vancouver for the rest of my bandmates to finish their work days, and then we would meet, have supper, and then go and rehearse. And one afternoon, one of the 2 people that worked in this keyboard department, and it was Vancouver's busiest, largest music store at the time, Long and McQuaid on 4th Avenue, for anybody who has a memory of that, said, I'm leaving. Why don't you work here? And I can honestly say the thought had never occurred to me. It was one of those light bulb moments where you thought, could I? I had a day job just working in the stock market as a courier at that time, and could I work in a music store? Do I know enough to be helpful to people? And by the end of the day, I'd had 2 interviews and agreed to leave my other job. And 2 weeks later, I was working at that music store. Found out very quickly that I really loved it. That I did have information that was helpful to people, and began to kind of build my skills in explaining more difficult concepts to people that weren't necessarily technologists. They were musicians, but wanted to use technology. And that's an interesting bridge to learn how to cross and to navigate. And so I began to build those skills. And 6 years later, really created my own opportunity. I created my own interview to go and work for the Canadian Roland company that was headquartered not that far from where I was working at the time. Mm-hmm. And at first I was told, we don't have a job for you. We really value you staying in the music stores. And again, by the end of the day, I'd had an interview with the president and was hired into a job called a product specialist. Actually didn't know what the job was. I knew what product demonstrators did because they visited the music stores often, but what is a product specialist for Roland? Didn't know whether travel was going to be involved. Found that out very quickly because in my second week I was in Toronto doing my first clinics on Roland synthesizers, and that was my start into Roland. I started and still feel very connected to our products, technology, the artists that make magic with them. I love working in that nexus between the technology and the people that really make the magic with it, and not only showcasing opportunities for them that we've created, but also really listening to them as well, and listening to their views and their wants and their needs, and then trying to parlay that into things that Roland can take away.
But by the way, Paul, this is very interesting you say that, because already a couple of people that mentioned a very similar path, so through retail. And we actually recently had Rodrigo Ibieta, who is like a director of hardware product management in Universal Audio. And when he was sharing his path, it was like, wow, it's just same like a selling guitars, then landed in Fender, and that and then become like a product R&D guy, right, in the company.
Yeah, and I do think we could explore that further. I think what I've come to learn in my life and in my career is that story is everything, and there are so many contexts within which story lives in the world of music. And in the case of the work that I do, there's of course the stories that we share out to the world, and we try and make the technology that we've developed interesting and compelling and worth exploring. But there's also the stories that we bring back in from the world into our company, and how we relate to those stories, and then how we respond to those stories. And so I think people that work in music stores, to this day, I have the utmost respect, having done the job for 6, almost 7 years. It's a very difficult job to do. It can be very rewarding. It can be very frustrating. At times you can feel very undervalued, and at times you can feel on top of the world when a customer says, you know what, you really helped me today, and I made something that I couldn't have made without you. That's a tremendous feeling. But it's all about story. You learn to tell customers stories in ways that they can appreciate. You learn to listen for their stories. And so I do think there's something to that. I think the gifted storytellers are the ones that probably, among other skills that you either are gifted with or you acquire, I think story is one of the things that can propel you.
We'll still touch this. Paul, if I can just say one thing, because I jump straight to the to our conversation. I mean, gladly, but I just wanted to tell everybody who's watching that traditionally there will be Q&A at the end, and so you can post questions, or some comments throughout the webinar, and I mean podcast, the show, however we call it, and we will just try to answer as many as we can at the end. We also remember that we have this Discord server, and there is also like a Facebook group for those who prefer Facebook, and you can join this group. I'll share a link later throughout the the podcast, so we can just share the questions later there, and we'll try to pass them along to Paul. So maybe if we don't answer everything, we'll be able to answer them later.
Sure.
And also I wanted to say that Paul Rodrigo, who is actually about whom I spoke, from Universal Audio, is here, like listening to us, saying hi. So hi Rodrigo. Good to.
Hi folks.
Yep. So yes. With this said, yes, let's go back to.
Sure. And I'll speed up again. As a storyteller, I tend to get lost in my own narrative sometimes. But once in Roland, I had the chance to travel, first all across Canada, and then into other parts of the world as well, demonstrating products, supporting people that have purchased our products. A few years in, I began to be given opportunities to have some discussion with R&D in Japan. I give away my age a little bit. I joined Roland in 1992. At that time, we didn't really have laptop computers quite yet. We didn't have mobile phones yet. There weren't PDF files. My days, especially in those first 5 or 6 years, would look like visiting music stores in a city during the day, doing a clinic or a workshop for customers in the evening, getting back to the hotel, retrieving messages for technical support, which I also did. And then I would just work my way from Eastern Canada, which was the later time zones in the day, out to the West, returning people's phone calls. For anybody who's done that work, my respect to you, especially pre the world of PDFs, because you had to live by photographic memory and through the vision of the people that you were talking to on the telephone. And it was a lot of, tell me what you're looking at right now. Okay, to the left of the display, there should be a button that says this, but you're just doing this all from memory. And I know that ultimately helped me in the end. But in any case, from there, I got a chance to move into some more management roles, product management, and then marketing communications management. Again, that storytelling skill travels with you and helps you find your way into some other opportunities. About 10 years, so this about 2006, really unbeknownst to me, the founder of Roland, Mr. Kakahashi, the late Mr. Kakahashi, who I'd had the really good fortune to spend a lot of time with in my career while he was alive. He had designs on me moving into more executive management in the company, something that I never aspired towards, but he had a plan for me. And in 2006, I became the chief operating officer of the Canadian company. And I was effectively running the business because the CEO at the time had been asked to go and start another business, actually in another country in the United States. And so he would check in, but I was essentially running the business. And then 2.5, 3 years later, I became the president and the CEO of Roland Canada. Again, nothing that I'd been dreaming about, nothing that I aspired towards, but honored to be given the opportunity. The challenge was that when I became the CEO of Roland Canada, it was just as the Lehman Brothers shock was impacting economies. And Canada, in the end, didn't get impacted the same way the United States did, but we were impacted. Our trough wasn't as deep, and it didn't take as long for us to climb out. The central banks were managed very, very well. But for somebody who had never run a company before, never even thought about the process of running a company, to suddenly be faced with how do you balance physical inventory with, cash in the bank, and how do you, operate a company profitably on smaller profit margins? One of the things I could say that I'm very proud of the team for is that we took a step back and said we really need to re-engineer this business in Canada in order to maintain our viability going on with using much smaller profit margins to fund the operations of the company. And so we were the first Roland company really to outsource all of our logistics. We reviewed all the functions of the company and went through a process of bucketing them in terms of what are the things that only we can do, what are the things that we like to do, but maybe we don't have to do ourselves, and what are the business functions that we really shouldn't be doing that others can do better than we can, more efficiently, more effectively. And we went through that process. Logistics was one of them, and so we outsourced the logistics to third party. But in so doing, what you then create is an opportunity to reconsider physically where offices are located. And normally where you'd put an office that's attached to a warehouse is out in rural areas. But now that we didn't have warehouses, we could relocate our offices in Toronto and Vancouver to metropolitan areas and creative areas, and opened up Roland's first, we called them Roland Inspiration Centers. And so these were kind of a hybrid office and a showroom that was open to the public several hours during the week. People could come in and we would hold events there. And they were really, I think, one of the precursors to the Roland stores that we see around the world today. Last little stretch there in Canada was as part of making the company stronger. We had been a publicly traded company before Lehman Brothers shock. We were taken private through a management buyout. The private equity firm that orchestrated the management buyout was actually based in Seattle, just south of where I was, and they specialized in working with Japanese companies. And so they, as part of their due diligence, they went around the world and interviewed executives in the business, people that they knew had some level of influence. And I happened to be the first because I was just 2 hours by car north of where they were. And had never been through that process before, answered the questions as best I could, talked about myself. And a few months later, after the buyout had happened, I was contacted, and I was told, you're doing a great job. The company's always been profitable under your leadership. We're thankful for that. But we think that you can make more valuable contributions in other areas of the business, reconnecting with product and technology and customer. And would you be interested in stepping out of that role and helping us to set up the first global marketing organization for Roland? And so that was my next step. I did that, took a leap of faith, as I've always tried to do, trust other people's assessment of your abilities and be willing to take those risks. So that eventually in 2017, that brought my family and I to Los Angeles, just southeast of Los Angeles. And so I worked helping to build the global marketing organization for 3 years, was then asked to help build the company's first global customer experience team, really focused on the quality of the post-purchase experience for people that have purchased. Yeah, please.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of months ago, I was like, I was just like changing gear in the studio and like asking some, obviously like a lot of in audio interfaces are for like a semi-professional are just mostly the same. So what I heard from a couple of people say, buy Roland, why? Because their customer support is like of the best, possible quality you can. So I heard this a couple of times, right? And actually, yeah, I mean, finally I didn't for different reasons, because I have like a specific setup but I mean, yes, that's soon. So
well, that's meaningful. Thank you very much. We made a lot of changes. We tried to streamline a lot of the different jobs to be done as a customer and as a brand. Once somebody makes the decision to invest in your products, things like putting QR code registration cards in every package, so that when you purchase something, you just scan the QR code. And if you've already got what we call a Roland account, and there's millions of people that do, it just immediately adds what you've just purchased to your gear locker and Roland account. If you don't, there's a very simple process to create the account, and then it just adds the gear. There's no having to find serial numbers or things like that. And once you have that, that's the pathway to our support. We kind of re-engineered how product support worked as well, which is, as for anybody on the live audience or viewing afterwards that works in this area, again, my profound respect to you, because product support in creative worlds is a very difficult thing to deliver effectively. Yeah. Not the least of which reasons is that most of your customers are active when your business is not. And musical instruments it's not the size of business that affords companies the ability to staff round the clock 24/7 phone-based product support with the level of expertise that's required to really bring value to a customer and solve problems. And so how do you help people when they need to be helped, and then give a path for deeper help, more higher level of expertise if needed? And so we reconsidered all of that. Anyway, that brought me to, I built over all of these years, I built really good relationships with engineering, product research and development. One of the things as we built the customer experience group was that we realized we were collecting a massive amount of first party data that we started to mine and run reports on and whatnot, to understand the kinds of questions that were being asked, how people were using the products, and we started to provide that to R&D. And for them, that was a massive gift. And then we started to add our own analysis and interpretation. I always say there's a risk if you just provide data to somebody. The risk is that you're providing noise. It's unanalyzed, it's uninterpreted. And so we started to add the analysis and the interpretation. And that led us to starting to discuss what became Roland Future Design Lab. And yeah, I know that's another question that you've got, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, no. Just like I was like so eager to, to hear actually, how come the lab was funded. So that's actually great introduction to this next question. Actually, is how you became the lead of the lab and actually what it does, right? What Roland Future Design Lab is.
Yeah, absolutely. For anybody who's been a fan of Roland for more than a few years, you'll know that our slogan is "We Design the Future," and that slogan has kind of come and gone over the decades, and it's back to prominence now. But we began. So there was a time going back, I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, where it had kind of faded to the background again. And like many brands do, you bring other slogans in, and you have better ideas as to how to inspire and to excite people around your brand. And so there was lots of other slogans that were being used. Japanese companies, bless them, we have a tendency to have sloganitis, where we'll hit you with buzzwords and catchphrases and slogans, every which way till Sunday. And we certainly,
I think the most. And I probably for listeners, it may be the most interesting part too is that a lot of companies have like some innovation, product development. Just think of new products. Like a data from the market. We Navi do it too, right? But what actually was mostly sort of interesting to me was that what you describe also on your profile is that Design Lab actually does projects not only related to the immediate future but some distant future, right? You're
correct.
Yeah. So this is like some kind of interstellar scenario, no? So that was, I was so curious, how
for sure. Yeah, and I'll get right into that, because connected to that phrase, "We design the future," as I was saying, my boss at the time was a fellow gentleman named Mr. Masahiro Minoa. He's actually now the CEO of Roland Corporation. At the time, he was our CIO, and I reported directly to him in the Global Customer Experience Group. And he and I have been friends in the business for probably almost 25 years, I would say. And we knew each other very, very well and trusted each other very much. And we had this rolling discussion about how we loved this phrase, "We design the future." I will say to people, if, for fans of the Nike brand, there's the "just do it" phrase. And for some, that's a really emotional thing. They want to wear it on their clothing. They identify with their own interpretation of the intention of that phrase. And for me, "We design the future" had that same impact on me as a fan of Roland, but also as a team member of Roland as well. And I kind of longed for the day that we bring that back and make it central again. And so Minoa-san and I had been talking about that. And we both agreed that, anybody can bring back a slogan and put it everywhere. But for us, we felt we had an opportunity, if we could do it, to bring a new meaning to this, a new depth of meaning to this "We Design the Future." And we talked a lot about that and started to involve some others in the conversation as well. we thought a lot about what we was, as you know, in the earlier years, we was Roland. We are designing the future, and we thought a lot more about how, you know, maybe we now is much more a co-creative process. It's a much more universal we. We thought a lot about designing the future. That's a very strong statement. You can just let it roll off the tongue, but if you really think about it, it's a very intentional thing. And I'll pause for a second, because if we look at Roland's history and where people will give us credit for not only influencing music but driving culture as well, things like the 808 and the 303, the Jupiter 8, and what have you. You know, these were particularly the 808 and the 303. These are culture defining and genre defining instruments, and it wasn't purely by design. In fact, the 808 was a series of serendipitous accidents, if you will, that got it to its position in music and culture. And we were careful to not take too much ownership of that. But there are other times where we have been very intentional with trying to take those steps. But we thought about that, design the future, and how we wanted it to be in this new era more than just a marketing slogan. We wanted there to be things that we could point to in the companies, that were actions, that were activities, that were investments, that were bringing meaning and functionality to this phrase, we design the future. And so then we started to think about product R&D and the challenges that face product R&D. And like most companies, and I'm sure for you, Avid is no different, there's so much pressure to build roadmaps and deliver results in the nearer term. And like many Japanese companies, Roland follows a kind of a classic 3-year midterm plan structure. And as you get towards the end of the current midterm plan, you start thinking about the next midterm plan. But if that also forms the boundaries of designing the future, that's not really looking forward that much. But that's some of the reality, the constraints that product R&D faces, is that they're really so focused on these 3-year boundaries, right? Exactly. And
that's already like a lot. I would say that in many companies cannot even afford that. I mean, we work both for like a large organizations, and of course Japanese probably the biggest in the industry, but a lot of smaller businesses, they just come from one version to another, right? And if they have a annual roadmap, that's already like a something. So I think that's just like big trap, that you always just chase new few features, just like a small growth, and like how to say, fulfilling like a customer needs, and like some feature requests, and yeah, so that's an interesting trap.
No, you're right, and it absolutely is. And it's as a technology company in the world as well, you've also got the trap of the allure of the technology of the moment as well. And so you try and make decisions. Do we chase this and be in the popularity contest and try and ride that wave, which for some companies that are big and fully resourced, that's perhaps an easier thing to do. Musical instrument companies, we're the tool makers that support a much larger industry. We have the benefit of being associated with the music industry, but we're not the music industry. We're the tool makers that support.
Thank you for saying this. Thank you for saying this. You know what? I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I mean, I very often ask myself a question: is music industry working for musicians, or is working for itself? I don't want to go into maybe too controversial, topic. Just of course, every company must make money, but I think if we lose this mission, so to speak, right, and money making becomes more important than we just forget why we are here. That's just like probably the end. And because then we are no different than any other company. And I think, I love music industry just because we are so mission driven, and we work for artists, and we very often are either former artists or like artists working, like a full time and doing gigs in the evenings, So I think Yeah, that's
You know, I agree with you, and I relate to what you're saying. And of course, yeah, that does point to a much bigger question about, you know, what is the company's why? And I've got some very strong views on how important it is for a company to establish their why and just never change from that. You can adapt other parts of the business. And a very famous business author named Jim Collins, who writes about this in his Good to Great and Built to Last and Great by Choice books. There's actually a very powerful Roland related story in some of that. If we have time, maybe in the Q&A later, I'll happily share that. But in any case, you know, for Roland, our why, yes, we've got stakeholders that we have to satisfy. We're a publicly traded company. Investors want to have a good return on their investment, for sure. But our why is bigger than just making profit. Our why is to inspire people to be creative in a very non-democratic, or in a very democratic way, rather. And that's what kind of drives us to be. We have to be a successful business and a well-managed business to continue to drive towards and support the quest to achieve our why. But the successful business is not the why. The inspiring people to be creative is the why. And again, I could talk for a long time on that one.
Yeah.
But you know, back to the We Design the Future. And I'm just getting finished with the Roland Future Design Lab. We thought about this problem of the constraints that face product R&D and the KGIs that they're measured with. Again, I'll drop another name. Jeff Moore wrote the book Crossing the Chasm. He also wrote another companion book called Zone to Win, and he talks about this problem exactly, about how, you know, innovative companies that can be sustainably innovative really need to find ways to section off their innovation R&D from the kind of the bread and butter R&D that drives the performance. And he calls it the performance zone in Zone to Win. And so Manoa and I talked about the need to, or the opportunity to create, you know, one or more research and development groups that weren't living in the here and now, that we were living in the next. And we didn't have the name Roland Future Design Lab yet. We didn't know, you know, what these teams would look like. We didn't know who would lead them at that time. It wasn't a discussion of me leading them. Very fortunately, as the idea started to coalesce and we came closer to the time that Mr. Manoa was going to become the CEO of the company, he came to me on a call and he'd said, you know, I really believe in these ideas that we've been talking about. There's a convenience to having a Japanese person lead some of these really core strategic functions of the business, because being a Japanese headquartered company, it means that there's a more immediate, you know, first language conversation that can happen. But he said to me, I've tried to find somebody that's capable of running this, and really the only person is you. So would you do this? And again, it wasn't I thought you'd never ask. I was a little bit surprised, and then absolutely, that this is my dream job. I think I've been in training for 32 of my 33 Roland years to do this. And so last July we officially started Roland Future Design Lab with a small team, and we've been slowly expanding over the last little while.
So how big is the lab now? How many people?
Now we've got, I think we're 8 people. And that's those people are spread across. That includes myself. It includes a communications person, and then we've got AI, ML, engineering, data sciences, and then more conventional kind of Roland engineering, but now focused on different problems to solve in different opportunities. And our intention is over the next couple of years to expand that out. We'll continue to build the team both in Japan, but also overseas as well. There's so much fantastic AI, ML talent in Europe, and so we're right now we're building a bit of a hub of those skills in Europe, but we're also going to expand the team in the US, and then hopefully into some emerging markets as well over time.
Are you saying I know that you can talk about everything, but I mean, from what you're saying, it sounds like the AI is the major focus right now, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I would be lying if I said it wasn't, but again, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything that anybody on this audience isn't carrying with them. So forgive me for that. But for continuity, we'll say AI is this generation's general purpose disruptive technology. And in the same way that the internet was and electricity was and what have you. And it is in the process of touching everything.
Sure.
And for us in the music products industry to not recognize that and respond to it in whatever way we choose, but to have some determined response to it, I think is irresponsible. And so, yes, it's absolutely a focus right now, but it's by no means the exclusive focus. We're doing work in things like extended reality, connectivity, wireless connectivity is another area of focus. Members of my team helped to build the Wi-Fi module that is at the center of the new V-Drums family of products, and I'm sure we'll see that propagate to other parts of the catalog in the future as well. And so, yeah, there's lots of things that we're looking at.
Yeah, I was heading to, because to me, I don't want to say AI to me it's already like I don't find it like an innovation anymore. I find it as a commodity, although it's still on the hype, like a sort of cycle early stage. I would say to me, conversation with you was particularly exciting because I say, hey, what's beyond that? So what are the future? Everybody talks about AI, so this is nothing, like a new, but talking about like something will be then 20, 30, 50 years from now.
Right.
Like
right.
Interstellar, like watching Interstellar or like a Minority Report, and actually talking to a person who, like a design things like this, right?
Yeah. Well, and I understand why you would make that comment about commoditization. I would say that AI and machine learning is such a vast category of technology that I don't think overall that it's been commoditized. I think that there are, we've obviously seen the popularity of large language models and GPT interfaces to them. And there's an argument to be made for the current trajectory is towards commoditization of certain experiences. But there are many things that we can do with large language models and small language models and cloud-based and edge-based models and what have you, that I don't think we're near any kind of a commoditization on yet.
I wasn't precise. I mean,
no, it's okay.
I was more trying to say it's just become super popular.
It is, yeah, it is, but I think it's a valid observation that you make, but I think therein lies both the challenge and the opportunity in the music products industry, in music creation, but elsewhere as well. Is what are the things that we might be able to do with large language models that go beyond text prompting to get something interesting on the output? And one of the problems that we're thinking about, problem one day, opportunity the next, right? One of the problems that we're thinking about right now is, if you read reports from really credible organizations like Media that talk about this groundswell of the consumer creator in the world, and hundreds of millions of people are now experiencing that euphoric moment of having created music and brought something into the world that didn't exist. There's an argument to be made around that, but anyway, that didn't exist to them beforehand, and that they've had a hand in this. But I think probably anybody on this call would agree with me that there's a massive chasm that lives between that experience and holding a guitar for the first time, or sitting down at a piano and saying, I want to learn this, or being at a drum kits, or becoming committed to DJing and remixing. There's a huge chasm that exists between those immediate, simple text prompt based experiences and being a music creator bona fide. And we're thinking, I'll just finish the thought and then I'll let you jump in. But how can things like large language models, GPT is the interface to those, how might those play a role in building bridges across from this text prompt based music creation opportunity through to what we would consider to be the bona fide world of music creation? And we think there are things that could be done there that could be quite interesting, and so we're thinking about that.
Gotcha. Well, I have a question. So do you really believe that artists adopt technology that much, or are we not just playing in our own sort of? I know obviously that's not certain necessarily 100%. It's not black and white, because obviously there are synths and there is like a digital audio workstations. Plenty of like a digital recording in general. So obviously the industry changed a lot, but I would say that's not that much innovation over last couple decades than those that I described. And I mean, there's still piano, there is still guitar, there are instruments
Mhm.
that are hundreds year old, and we're just designing technologies. And who would use them? Will this be like a complete shift in your opinion, or will musicians still use classical, like different types, maybe just a different guitar or like a AI powered synths, but it's just still the same interfaces, the same. It's just, what I'm trying to say. I
No,
sometimes
I know exactly. I know exactly what you're saying, and
R&D engineers tend to build stuff for themselves, not for
mhm.
the they have this bias that this is interesting because it's sort of like it pushes the technology forward, but where the customer is in this. So I'm just asking for your opinion, of course.
No,
Not
and of
just
course, and it is just my opinion. But what I will say that I think probably stands as fact is that going back to the way that you framed the question was, do artists adopt technology? I think we can all agree that there's been a symbiotic relationship between technology and music from the beginning of music, and one begets the other. There are times when the technology has driven new forms of music, and there are other times where the needs or the aspirations of the artist have driven technology innovation. And I think we all carry our stories about the great composers making requests of luthiers and piano builders and things like that to add keys to a keyboard so I can render this opera that I hear in my head and whatnot. And so we had that kind of symbiotic relationship. And there are other times, more recently probably, where the innovation has been more technology out, and that's sought to inspire artists in new ways. But yes, artists do adopt technology, and technology adopts artists, I would say. When it comes to your fundamental question of will we continue to use these kind of classic user experiences and aspire towards mastering them, nobody can say with pure certainty yes or no, but I would tend to say yes. Because I think the world is full of established UXs and UIs that may not reflect the state of the art and what technology is capable of delivering, but they're so established, they're so respected, there's such a progression towards them as one grows up and learns skills. And whether that's why are we still using a QWERTY keyboard in front of a computer when we can sit and talk to it right now and have just as effective an input output experience, but yet everything that we've got, and even those things that didn't have a keyboard, we can attach keyboards. I've got an iPad here right now that Steve Jobs said you'll never see a pencil or a keyboard attached to an iPad. Yet now those are the first two accessories that people will buy is some sort of a Bluetooth keyboard and an Apple Pencil. And it's because we tend to gravitate towards these user experiences and user interfaces that are classic, if you will. And I think that the guitar, the fretted interface, I think the piano, the drum kit, wind instruments are all these classic interfaces, and the playing paradigms. One thing that Mr. Kekahashi really infused in me years ago was that when Roland enters the world of an established instrument like the piano, like the guitar, the drum kit, and now more recently wind instruments, even accordions, it is not for us to propose such a radical new interface that the player has to learn new things and step towards us. It's for us to step towards the player and respect the 20, 30 years of technical mastery that they've accumulated and present something to them that fully respects that, and then layers into that some new possibilities that are not possible perhaps in the acoustic physical mechanism world. And I believe that. Now, Does that mean we're not going to see totally new ways of expressing ourselves? Absolutely not. I think there's, especially when we think about the possibilities in extended reality, where things can become perhaps more macro driven and gesture based. Exactly. At least as an initial experience. Is that something that presents a progression from typing in a text prompt? Now I can perhaps interact to a degree with something that I've created by text prompts using gestures, and maybe I can kind of remix or rearrange or reorchestrate using gestures. And is that part of this bridge towards being a full-on music creator?
Listen, the funny thing is that with my former piano teacher, I spoke a lot about those gesture in, even like about some prototypes, because she's like a conductor by education, and she say, we've been like sitting, and she's also like a very curious person. So we say, hey, maybe we can just together build some, like a new. I like it, the idea very much. Like a minority. Automatically, I think of Minority Report and just like a conduct. Like a composing in the virtual reality or even playing. That's so. Yeah. Paul, if I can just again sort of try to jump ahead of this wave and go into more distant future. So what in your opinion will be like a future challenges of musicians and creatives in general? I mean future, like in 50 years from now, 30 years from now, just try to escape from the AI hype trap and sort of like a look beyond that.
I don't really think in terms of, if I can reframe that question for a little bit, because I think there's two ways to come at that question. One is, what are the challenges that might face the music products industry in how we propose to continue innovating? What are the challenges that might face creators? I don't really think in terms of challenges that will face creators. Although there is one I will come to in a moment, but I think more about how can we, as the music products industry, encourage creators to continue exploring new ways to express themselves. I don't ever foresee a time in human history where we're going to lose that desire to create, because I think that's a fundamental pillar of being human and conveying meaning and emotion and imparting ourselves on our art and sharing that out and creating a legacy. And I think that will always be there. I think, broadly speaking, are there, how will changes in the environment impact music
environmental
making? Yep. How will probably the increasing demand, both from the consumer but also by governments, for manufacturers to be more sustainable? How can we continue to build instruments that use exotic materials and things like that in a sustainable fashion? And how willing will the creator be to give up on a particular fretboard on a guitar or something like that, in respecting the goal of humanity becoming more sustainable? I think about, and this is a little bit more far-fetched, but not really. And the reason why I could say that is I'm going to talk for a moment about what does music creation look like as we leave Earth. And last night, I happened to live in a part of Orange County where Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is one of the bases that SpaceX does a lot of their launches from. So about 9 o'clock at night, I called the family out and we watched another SpaceX launch go right over top of our yard, and we could watch the booster descend and light up as it came to land on a drone off the shore and whatnot. And I was saying to my oldest daughter, I said, could you ever imagine, even as recently as 5 years ago, that this would be as common as watching an airplane fly overhead, that we would go outside and, oh yeah, right, there's a launch tonight, let's watch that. And so continue that line of thought. And as we take humanity and we start to explore the stars, and we can't depend on gravity and atmosphere being constants. What does that suggest needs to happen in order to continue to be expressive? Because we're going to be spending longer time, and probably being creative is going to be one of the things that allows us to be in longer flights and away from home, is, being able to express ourselves. And so how do creative tools need to adapt to these new environments? And I can say that that's another thing that we're thinking about. Don't look for anything on music store shelves tomorrow that might pose an answer to any of this, but that's part of designing the future, is pushing yourself out past this 3 to 5 year window and really thinking about what things might look like 10, 12, 15, 20, 50 years.
Are you not Matthew McConaughey, by the way? It's just like when you talk about these lunches, it reminds me really of this scene, in the Interstellar, right?
I'm a fan of Interstellar, but I'm not trying to channel Matthew McConaughey right now. But hey, I'd be honored if I was able to do that. So
yeah. By the way, guys, all these materials that and I mean books and articles that Paul is just referring to, we'll just publish on our membership area of the podcast, right? So I'm just posting these links in the chat, so by the way, if you'd like to support our podcast, we'll be super happy. It's obviously like all free. We do it like for a year now, so even small donation, like through the the Buy Me a Coffee page is of great support, right? Because as I still work. It's just like my evening after work activity. So, I will appreciate your help. And it's just not like a donations, as I say, we just publish a lot of additional content, articles, and there will be also like a premium episodes over there, so I mean, thank you very much, guys, in advance. And also I want to mention a small ad that the podcast is also available right now on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, obviously on YouTube channel. There is actually YouTube channel, Audio Product Podcast. You can see here right now on the screen, if you just look through for Audio Product Podcast on those media platforms, you will find us. Obviously Discord server, I will post the link again. And the premium page for the members, right? Yeah, so you can just, if you don't want to like watch, you can, or you have to leave early, you can take your phone and headphones and but walk a dog and listen to our conversation later as well. So thank you. I appreciate all your support, guys. And yeah, and I just lost track. Yeah.
Future music, Roland.
Yeah, and Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch base yet on the AI thing, because you already mentioned a little bit, right? That we all know it's going, to be adopted this way or another. But I'm just like curious, what do you think? Well, what will be the path, right? Or where this technology will be adopted, at least in the near future, right? In the sort of...
Well, I do have some fairly strong views on this, and so I'll speak to them briefly. Where we think that it should go is to continually find its way into workflows that support creativity, that help people to be creative, that inspire to people creative, but it doesn't displace the human creative process. And I'll give a brief shout out to Roland. A little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, we founded jointly with Universal Music Group an effort that we call AI for Music. The website, which we can share later, is AI4music.info. And this is an interesting story that led to this, but perhaps for another time. But suffice it to say that we took the time to invest in developing what we call the principles for music creation with AI, and there are 7 of them. And those principles really, focus on equity for the creator, transparency in how technologies are being developed and used, sustainability, and hearing the voice of the artistic community before making decisions on what tools are to be developed and deployed. And I'm really pleased to say that we've got, we're closing in on 150 supporting brands from all over the world in all different aspects of music technology, music academia, music publishing and distribution, associations, and so on, and more are coming on board every day. But back to the question, we think, and typically we speak in terms of what we call aligned AI. And by aligned AI, we mean AI that is aligned to be supportive of humanity and not displacing of humanity. And in this case, creativity. We're very strong on that. And unfortunately, because the technology afforded it, there are some very big brands that perhaps don't share those values right now that are stealing a lot of limelight right now. But in the long run, we very much believe that supportive of human creativity is really important. Now, what that looks like, again, we're in the process of listening. One of the things that we've committed to as Roland Future Design Lab is we've developed a platform that we call the Technology Preview. And for a Japanese company, that's a very nervous moment to put something out into the world that isn't a finished something, especially a brand like Roland, who values quality and reliability and durability and so on, to put something out there where you're saying, this isn't a finished anything. We have an idea. We're going to make it available to you, and we very much like to hear what you think of this. Is this useful, not useful? Could it be improved? Should we just leave it and go and do something else? And one of those previews is called Tone Explorer. Long story short, it focuses on the problem of I can come up with musical ideas, I can come up with motifs, I can come up with melodies, bass lines, and whatnot, but how can I possibly find the best sound? I'm not an orchestrator or an arranger. And, when I was growing up with synthesizers, a synthesizer might have had 8, 12, 16, at the most 64 presets. And you just got to know the vocabulary. You got to learn the voice, the palette of that synthesizer. Now, what do you do when, I've got a Phantom synthesizer or a Jupiter X beside me. They are based on our Zencore synthesis system. And the Zencore synthesis system in Roland Cloud has access to tens of thousands of sounds, and you can even connect to them. In the case of the Jupiter X, you can put a Wi-Fi dongle in and connect to them immediately wirelessly. And so when your palette becomes so broad, how do you find those best matches? And so Tone Explorer uses metric learning to build a profile of a musical phrase, and then compare and contrast that to profiles of sounds, and bring together closer matches and push away less favorable matches. And so that's available for people to try right now. If you're not in Roland Cloud, it comes with a 3-month Roland Cloud Ultimate membership, which is its own fun as well. But it also gives you a chance to give us some feedback. We have a Discord server set up for people to speak directly to us and tell us what they think about it. And so we're going to do a lot more of that as well. And all of that is answering the question of how will AI impact and where will it go?
Mm-hmm. Can I just share this article, Paul? This tech preview that you shared? That's the one, right? That you were.
That's right. Yeah. So that'll take visitors to Roland.com and our blog that we call Roland Articles. And there's a story there about Tone Explorer. And towards the bottom of that story, there's all the instructions you need. If you're on Roland Cloud, it tells you, how to get access to Tone Explorer. It's through one of our super instrument that we call Galaxius is kind of the portal to Tone Explorer. And if you're not, it tells you how to, redeem a coupon to get access to Roland Cloud so that you can try this and then try other parts of Roland Cloud as well.
Perfect. Listen, you mentioned so many interesting things about the sustainability and, these values and like a support, like a shared equity, right? In for artists, it's just, I think, the same issues artists always had. But actually, I'm trying to write an article about this subject because I think this question of sustainability actually poses very like a very interesting and difficult challenge to the business, because on one hand, if you want to be more sustainable, at some point, how to say that? Will this mean that we have to, let's say, release fewer products or like fewer updates? Of course, there is a way we can, like Ableton do the great job, right, with the latest push, I think, right? That's obviously like a modular. You can replace, I think, RAM, or even it's open for some future improvements, so you don't have to like replace the entire. I mean, kudos for this. I mean, I love that so much. But I mean, I remember we discussed, when we first met, this book less is better, because there are some, scientists that say, hey, if at some point we'll need to have like a negative economic growth, otherwise the planet will not suffice this, and how will this impact the business? On business is based on, let's say, like innovation race, and we're just always building something new, challenging. I understand that there is like a positive side of it, which is, like you say, pushing. It's just our creative nature to do new stuff. But where is the, the, let's say, greed and, I don't want to like.
No, I think I understand the point that you're trying to make, and how I'll answer it is this: Isaac Asimov fan, love the robot novels, love the Foundation novels. Read everything as a kid. Asimov's laws of robotics, the clue is in there, and not in the first three, but what he called the zero-with law, which I think is, you shall not harm humanity, or through your own inaction allow humanity to come to harm. And I don't mean to be too altruistic about this, but at a certain point, we have to think about the greater good, and we have to take action in the interest of the greater good. And I think there's ways that you can justify and rationalize that as a business, that at a certain point, if we don't think about this greater good, then we won't continue to be a profitable business, because there won't be it won't be viable to do this kind of business if we harm the environment past a certain point, if we deplete resources past a certain point. And so I'm not, and now I'm saying that, I'm not going to position Roland as, any white knight in this, but I can say that we're making concerted efforts to minimize packaging where that can be done and not risk damaging a product. Standardizing as much as we can on power supplies. You're seeing more and more of our products use USB-C where that's reasonable to do, as a not only an interconnect but a power supply a source. Roland has been for 20 plus years a champion of updatable hardware products, and whether we go back to the mid 90s and the V Studios and the V Guitar, the first V products, one of their big hallmarks was the fact that these were among the first generation of practically updatable hardware products, as opposed to having to open them up, swap out EPROMs to update something. These were things where you could transfer firmware into flash memory and update products, and we've continued to really try and be a leader in that regard. This Phantom synthesizer beside me here, it's still a current product. It first came to market in September of 2019, and we've continued to release not just kind of OS type firmware updates, but all new features, new sound engines, and new functionality to the instrument. And so it's competing with hardware that was brought to market for the first time as recently as 12 months ago. And at a certain point, you kind of run into the boundaries of what's possible in a certain hardware platform. But it's always in our mind, how can we extend the useful life of this? And I, so I think kind of pushing more and more into that. How do we use mobile devices as part, or have a mobile centric music creation experience as well, where hardware is the companion to the device as opposed to the device being the companion to hardware in some cases as well. And so these are all things that we're focused on. Again, I don't want to I don't want to make promises or create the sense that we've arrived at places that other people have not, but I do want to say that it is very much a focus for us.
Great. Yeah, I'm just like, I have even hard time to ask questions, because it's more like emotions or some feelings or some observations in the industry that I have even problem, to vocalize. That's why even if I'm trying to write an article, I'm not necessarily 100% sure what I'm trying to say. Yeah, but I can see, of course, like a concentration of the capital and you know, I mean, unfortunately, some of the, let's say, not most ethical like acquisitions of like smaller companies. I don't want to sort of, you know, that's sort of like worries me a little bit, and you know, sort of tell that there are people who are actually able to justify, you know, for greater good. You know what I'm trying to say? That's this low.
Yeah, I do, and I mean, especially when we're a technology company as we are, and other technology companies, again, there's that real urge, and there's that built-in desire to be connected with the state of the art in technology, and to drive towards that, you know, at I would say almost at all costs. But you know, I think there's a difference between responsible, accountable companies and companies, and you know, Roland has always aspired to be, and we try and inspire others to be responsible and accountable companies, and maybe it's more difficult for a smaller company to do that when you're just trying to, you know, get a toehold and get your brand recognized. But you know, once you do reach a certain level of success, however you decide to measure success, and perhaps the resources are a little bit more accessible to you, or the audience is a little bit larger, then, you know, I'd like to think that bringing more emphasis to that responsibility and accountability becomes more important.
Yep. By the way, I have to say that, and once again, it's not just to flatter. It is related not to Roland, but also to Yamaha, or, you know, Japanese brands. I mean, I always was great admire about mostly about the culture. I even have a friend who worked for another company, and he lives in Japan, right? And he was let go from some other music business, and his friends like said, "Hey, what did you do?" You know, he told me that in Japan, if you are just fired from the company, you must have done something terrible, that usually you have like a work for life. And it's just always, you know, in this, especially in this tech sort of bipolar technology business, when you hire and fire, and you have projects and you stop those projects. I mean, Japanese, you know, culture, it's, you know, I mean, it's just unlike anything else, you know, because even in the music business, it's not just like a Silicon Valley. Unfortunately, you can see that there is a lot of this, you know, like once again, I don't want to point fingers. I know it's business. Sometimes it's hard, right? And sometimes there is a crisis. I know also that some engineers I'm actually guilty of this too. Like, you know, they just are so passionate that they could do things for free, you know. So sometimes we fall into trap, or, you know, I mean, in companies, right? Because we are not able to monetize certain products, because, you know, we just love supporting our clients,
right?
Even if they don't pay. So, you know, so yeah. But I mean, that's I mean, honestly, always admired Japanese brands for that.
Well, and yeah, and I think again, that's probably fruit for a conversation in and of itself. But well, I'll use myself as an example. Does it make sense that a kid from Vancouver, Canada, who was selling synthesizers and learning how to use sequencers and Atari computers and Commodore Amiga computers to, you know, make music with MIDI in the mid 80s, does it make sense that he's leading a research and development group for his favorite Japanese brand all these decades later? No, it doesn't. It's difficult to rationalize that. But what I will say is that that's been one of, I think, the strengths, sometimes intentional, other times maybe not quite intentionally, but nonetheless, the desire has been there to give people opportunities, to stretch, to learn new things, to trust in their abilities. It's one of the things that I had to learn early on, and I'm glad that I did, was that at times, you know, when I was being offered an opportunity to move into another role, and, you know, usually I've really liked what I was doing, and I thought I was becoming quite good at it. And I was having a difficult time, especially moving into like a CEO job when you've just your brain has never been wired for that. But it's to trust the opinions of those around you that you've worked with and that you've worked for. And if they think you can do something, then be willing to take that risk and trust in your ability to learn that which you don't know. And I think that was something that I've come to really nurture in myself is, believe me, I'm in an environment where I'm learning new things every day right now. And I'm working with very, very smart engineers, and I'm not an engineer, and I don't try and be an engineer, but we need to be functional in the operating system of engineering. And we need to be able to have intelligent conversations in order to bring leadership. And so I'm, trusting in my ability to learn that which I don't know. And I would encourage that of others as well. If you could cultivate that within yourself, that's a worthwhile endeavor.
Absolutely. Listen, the original subject of the podcast is just, like designing the future of music creation. But I'm super happy that you said that, because a lot of people that listening to this show are aspiring music technologists, so to speak. So that's, your story is so inspiring, and I hope that will, be able to inspire in future generation of music people and audio people. That's actually the other, like, a goal and mission of this show. So I'm super happy, that you shared this story and you framed the conversation this way, because, that will be a great short when you say the story, kid from Vancouver, to like a head of R&D in Roland. But listen, once again, it's the subject or the question that we discussed before we decided to do the show. You mentioned once the divergent thinking, right? You mentioned that you're behind all this your how to say, moves in your career, right? And what happened between, like when you started in the selling synthesizers to now. You mentioned that like divergent thinking is one of those, I don't know, skills or traits that sort of was like a most important or like a game changing for you. So can you elaborate on this one a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I think, and I've been gifted in my career with having had the chance to work with people who I think kind of reflect this skill. But innovation is not linear. And particularly true innovation, and revolutionary innovation is typically not linear. And I think it's important to recognize that, and to be able to look at scenarios, to look at problems to solve, and not just approach them in this linear fashion. Okay, so A plus B must equal C. Let me find the C in all of this. And so, one of the things that certainly I've tried to cultivate, and I've tried to help others with this, is to take that step back and to take a broader look at what's before us, whether that's a problem to solve or an opportunity, and really explore the boundaries of it and push those boundaries out. And is there something to be found as we decentralize on this thing that we're thinking about, that might give us either a new perspective of that thing, or it might reveal something related to it that just, it was obscured, but now we can see it. And what about this over here? What if we kind of took this path, or what if we made this the focus, and that was our way to kind of bringing a solution to this, or addressing this opportunity. And so, at times, to this day, at times that's a very intentional process, because the temptation is to, I can see this. I can see this progression. It should go this way. And indeed, that might be the right way to do it. But the challenge is to force that moment to just step back and look more broadly at what's at hand. And at other times, it just comes very naturally as the rest of the room is talking about the linear progression towards a solution or towards a revelation. Just to be able to just, I'm listening to all that, and I can follow that path as well. But I'm kind of over here thinking about this. When you embrace that as a way of being, it's interesting how that brings itself into so many different scenarios. And maybe a company approaches you about a partnership, and you would look at what they're doing, and you would say, well, that doesn't have any relation to the business that we're in. But to be able to just listen to their story and to just dream a little bit and go, well, no, but what if we did this over here together? Could that be something worth exploring? And many times it's not, but just thinking that way could lead you somewhere else. That's
others may not necessarily think of. I got it.
It's so not I hope that makes sense. It's I think to those that practice it, it's a fairly, because it comes quite naturally, it's a fairly simple concept, but to actually relate it is maybe not quite so so easy at times.
That was my next question. I'm thinking, I like this question so much because I think it comes natural for me. But I was actually wanted to ask, can you learn that skill? Can you?
Yeah.
I know that there are people who are actually more like a convergent thinkers, and sometimes definitely sometimes it drives me nuts. But say, how can I, if you want to help somebody in their career, for example, right? To find opportunities that are not obvious, etc. What advice would you give to a person like this?
Well, I think there's a couple, and I will just pick up on something you mentioned there, because the convergent thinking or the kind of the red light, green light stages. I do think both skills are really important, because you can't just spend all of your time out in dreamland and not be able to say, okay, now let's take this one to a conclusion. Let's tie this one back into the original problem to solve, and see if we can't bring this to some interesting conclusion. That's its own skill, right? The ability to discern when we're at a moment where, okay, we're out in space, but we're at an interesting place right now. Let's tie it back in. Let's stop here, tie it back in, and see if we can build this and develop it. So I do think that that's also a critical must-have skill if you're a divergent thinker. But try and find people that can mentor you in this way, and maybe even indirectly. If there's somebody in the company, somebody in your community that thinks this way, find a way to spend more time with them and just listen and learn and watch. I'd love to. I'm a book recommender. I'd love to recommend a book on divergent thinking, but I actually don't have one. I'll actually, now I'm inspired to take some time to see if there's one or two kind of classic texts on this nonlinear or divergent thinking topic, and it's related in some ways to design thinking as well. I'll happily do that. But I don't really have a good, strong recommendation off the top of my head now.
Thank you, Paul. That's great advice anyway, and obviously that's also great. I want to encourage people to join our a membership area. Definitely there will be those articles. Maybe even Paul finds a good book to recommend. I'll actually think myself, myself too, because it's a very good question. I thought maybe you can. You turned the question back to me, so now I'll actually think after the podcast and what people could read to learn that. Yeah, and I 100% support what you say. It's obviously just equally dangerous to be a dreamer without a ability to execute or just narrow down and ideally, of course, every person has certain natural tendency, but actually to learn the other. The other thing is also very, very important, to be sort of balanced professional, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Paul, last question. I know that we're slowly getting to an end and there's still time for questions, so I wanted to ask, because it's a very practical question. We sort of came into so many directions, but you are fortunate to work for a pretty large company that can afford, having, a R&D unit like Future Design Lab. What do you think there is a space for that kind of activity in smaller companies? Most of the industry are 300 people, 400 people. It's really a huge audio business, right? So what do you think? What would you recommend, to the leaders, R&D leaders?
Well, I think my practical advice there would be to recognize that this kind of longer term thinking, is important, and that it can happen with or without a dedicated team. It can happen as something that you recognize back to your team as being something important that we want to encourage in the company. I would recommend that it be incentivized, give people a reason to spend time thinking about the longer term, and reward when they bring something interesting and potentially of value back into the company. doesn't have to be, segmented into a department. In fact, I think that there are arguments to be made for it potentially being stronger if it can become cultural across the company and recognized and rewarded and encouraged across the company. Everything needs a leader. Everything needs a champion. So, in those 200 and 300 person companies or the 20 to 50 person companies, if one or two of those people are in there, support them, give them a voice, empower them to help to propagate this out across the culture, and then recognize the value of it to the business through incentivization.
Perfect. I think that's a good, very, very interesting advice. By the way, I didn't ask you, to say this. It just came to me when you responded. Actually, we have a colleague in our network who is teaching classes, who is actually an audio entrepreneur, built the microphone company from scratch. Tomasz Żernicki, who was, by the way, the first guest of this podcast almost a year ago. And he, with me, teaches a class, product portfolio management, which is actually how to prioritize projects from, a customer support and more a feature maintenance and stuff, up to some R&D projects, and how can you sort of balance your portfolio so you can manage risks in those. And actually, it's great because Tomek teaches it based on his experience of building the company from really an idea, and actually bootstrap company. I mean, he got some grants from R&D grants from public institutions, but generally company that was self-funded. So that's I think the next one is obviously on after summer break, but I can just paste the link to people who are interested, because Tomek has some really interesting experience. Right. Yeah. So little time left for questions, but I think let's take some. Guys, I'm not sure if you're still listening, but if you do, please, ask questions. Yeah, we'll just wait for them, and
sure.
And in the meantime, I'll just look at my list. If I don't, I know that I still have few that I didn't ask. Yeah, guys. So any questions to Paul? Don't hesitate. Shout. Paul have such an interesting experience. Yeah. So maybe while we wait, is what are I mean, you already mentioned a little bit, expanding the team a little bit. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit more about some a future plans? Will this be only US-based unit or a?
Well, I think as I mentioned, we're not only are we interested in bringing more skills in to this, and more experience into the Roland Future Design Lab effort, and in the areas of continuing to strengthen our AI and ML and data sciences efforts, but also in the areas of user experience, material design. These are all areas that I think over time we're going to expand. But you get three potential wins anyway. When you do this kind of expansion, you get to bring that skill in, you get to bring a different perspective in, and so we're also interested in bringing perspectives from other parts of the world in as well. So if we can find these skills in parts of the world that perhaps aren't represented on our team, then that's another potential win for us as well. And so, yeah, we're working on that. Of course, we work to budgets like everybody else does. And so we've done most of our expansion for this year. There might be one more role that we're looking to bring in, but next year's just around the corner. So we'll be back at it.
And that's interesting, how that's in large organizations, the budgeting is, generally annual. So having a budget across multiple years is a challenge probably of its own, right?
Well, yeah, no, and we do run to annual budgets for sure. But then there's kind of a larger, kind of a midterm plan investment arc that's in there as well. And then there's some activities that just, especially when you're looking at longer term R&D, that aren't conducive to being completely constrained or aligned with an annual budget as well. But as I started to say that, I started to say, would I find that interesting if I were in the audience? And I would say, no, I don't think so. It starts to get pretty boring. But that's the reality.
Yeah.
You did. I wanted to say, you did ask kind of in our pre-discussion. You had an interesting question around is there a risk of technology damaging our cognitive skills and our creative ability to focus? And I love the question. And I don't know. And again, it's one of those questions where there probably isn't an absolute answer to it. But what I will say, what I immediately thought about when I looked at that question was, so I have a love, true confessions moment. I have a love of hardware MIDI sequencers. And I've got a collection of Roland hardware MIDI sequencers that goes back to the MC500, the MC500 Mark II, the MC80, MC50 Mark II, and so on. And if I look at my own musical life, the years where I was working with a hardware sequencer were also the years that I was most musically productive. I wrote more music. I performed more music. And I've thought a lot about that. And I do, we start now, we'll go into the world of the value of creative limitations. And I think it's almost contradictory in a sense that, or even ironic that music, when music creation production moved into the computer, it became more visual. And like everybody else, I was so excited to see those first versions of Cubase. And before we had Logic, it was Creator and Notator, where, it was like, this is how I think I visualize music in my own head. And now I can kind of render it and work with it in this same way. And indeed, loved that and still absolutely love that environment. But I think that it comes with a risk as well, in that music isn't visual. We hear it and then we render it using our faculties. And there was something really magical about that time when you were working with a 24x2 LED and fixed buttons. And for me, I learned the MC500 like it was another instrument. It was an extension of myself. I didn't have to look at my hand as I was recording, copying, pasting, maybe doing what they called microscope mode edits in Roland language. I didn't have to look. I could keep my eyes closed and stay focused on what I was hearing, and then render it through the interface, the hardware interface of the sequencer. And I think what I realize now is that the visual in modern digital audio workstations, and I'm not saying it's necessarily the problem of the DAW. I think it's the problem of how we relate to the technology. And that's kind of the point I want to make, is that I've allowed it to become a distraction. And I don't have enough of those times where I just kind of close my eyes and just play the music. And so, I think, instruments like the Phantom, which has DAW control modes in it, and more of that kind of thing, would be beneficial to decentralize us from the screens and get us back to imagining the music and rendering it through the things that we can touch and feel, and to kind of answer the question fully. Is it damaging? Yes, it is damaging if we allow it to be, but technology is a tool. And the age-old analogy, the hammer can build a house and it can also break a window. And so it's how we relate to that tool. It's how we use the tool. So I do think that humanity has a lot of work to do in building healthy relationships with technology. And I do think it's incumbent upon brands like Roland to help people build healthy relationships with technology. And I'm encouraged by things that brands like Apple do around, limiting time, screen time, and things like this. I think those are kind of moving in the right direction. But as artists and creators, I think recognizing that we may, in some cases, need to redefine our relationship with the technology, not use it less, but use it in different ways than perhaps we are right now.
Thank you for Paul for saying this, because, and actually you voiced my concerns in such a great fashion. I ask this question a lot, to my premium guests, and I never can find proper words nor actually to express my concerns. But I mean, that's exactly why I ask it, right? Because I honestly feel, it's already deteriorating, especially with social media being probably the biggest sort of like a parasite of. I mean, of course, it connects us all. We couldn't, talk if this is not like for LinkedIn, right, or other social media. So I'm not saying it's obviously only evil, but I mean the relation with the technologies, it's broken, I think, a little bit, or damaged. But I also
it is, but there's hope there, and I've seen it in my own family. Maybe I'll finish with this vignette. Is that I've got two daughters that are 20 and 22 years old now that were brought to photography through Instagram, and loved the fact that they could capture photos, process them with filters, and make something that didn't exist before. And in both cases, these daughters have leaned into 35 mil DSLR photography, and one of them actually went to college to pursue that, but their spark was Instagram. And I think there's a real lesson to be learned there that I don't think Instagram, that Meta even understands themselves. And we go back to that conversation that we had earlier about, what are those bridges from text prompt based music creation to holding instruments and playing. And I think about my daughters and their Instagram journeys every day as I think about that problem. And I think about, what was it about that Instagram experience that at a certain point they reached this moment where they said, there's more to this. And I think I want to find out what that more is and whether I would enjoy it or not. And in the case of my daughters, they both did. So what can we do intentionally by design that has people pausing and looking up above the flower bed for a moment and saying, you know what, I think there's more to this. And I think I want to just find out a little bit. Maybe it's not for me, but I think I'd like to find that out.
Paul, that's all true. And actually great that you're saying this, but my point was that first of all, I mean, can you hear me? Because I think some issues with. Oh no,
I can hear you fine.
That's great. There is actually a organization called Center for Humane Technology. By the way, it's I think in California, and they're just funded. It's a foundation funded by executives and designers and engineers from big tech. I mean, Facebook and other companies. And it's funny, people probably may know them from, the Social Dilemma, right? The movie about Facebook, right? But they also have a very interesting podcast called Undivided Attention. This title is, it's very, very clear. And they say that the problem with these technologies, so like a problem with the relation with these technologies, that unless big tech understands, how, big of the impact this technology brings, it will not change, right? Because on the other hand, you say that's just a tool and people can make a relation with it. But the problem is that on one hand, you have an individual, very often, like a, teenager or a young person. And on the other hand, you have like a large organization that hires psychologists, sociologists, like designers, whose role in the company is actually to make this technology more addictive. So unless they change the design of it, so, so we don't use dark patterns and all these things, it may be difficult. But I mean, on the other hand, agree 100% that there is hope and it can still be used to our advantage.
Yeah, and when I say just a tool, I think it's important that I be clear that relative to the art that tool can render, it's just a tool.
Yeah,
it requires the human being to really make the magic and to make the art. And so that's why I kind of minimize it. It's relative to the human contribution.
Yep. Listen.
Thought about as a tool, absolutely. Tools can be dangerous. Tools can be destructive. Tools can be inspiring. Tools can be life-saving. And so, absolutely, they can have a profound impact on humanity as well.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I could go on, but I think, yes, we agreed to have like a 90 minutes, right? And then, and you will need to go. I mean, guys, do you have any, maybe you were shy, but any questions to Paul until we still have him?
feel free to find me on social media. I'm easy to find at McCabe P. We'll get you to find me on everything from Instagram to X and Blue Sky and LinkedIn and whatnot. I'm fairly easy to find, and I'm pretty communicative because it's a great way to interface with the world and do research. So don't hesitate if a question comes up later, either via this the show or just connect with me, and I'm happy to engage.
Cool. Paul, thank you so much, for the conversation. Thank you for all the thoughts. I mean, for me also like a great learning. I feel sort of always after each episode, I'm like inspired. Even like a month later, I'm just like, oh, that was such a good, thought and some kind of like a great reflection. By the way, very often I get some great words that I couldn't find during the episode. You can see right now, right? I mean, so hard actually to talk about things in your not your native language that you don't even necessarily 100% you're not sure that you are trying to convey. But
it's a privilege. I'm thankful that you asked me, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining, for listening, and see you guys in the second season. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you liked it. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and of course on our YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to it and hit the bell, because we publish a lot of interesting videos there, not just the episodes. You can also become a supporter and get premium content like additional reading, unpublished videos on our Buy Me a Coffee page, linked in the description of